Sister who sent poison, the last woman hanged in Victorian England. In March 1899, a young woman received a package at her asylum. Inside was a homemade cake, a gift from her older sister in London. She shared it with her friends. Within hours, they were all fighting for their lives. Within days, she was dead. And within months, her sister became the last woman executed in the 1800s. This is the true story of Mary Ansell, a case that divided Victorian England and still raises uncomfortable questions today about mental illness, poverty, and who deserves mercy. If you love real history told honestly, subscribe now. Let me take you back to 1899 London. Not the London of fancy balls and royal palaces, the other London. The one where families lived packed into single rooms, where children worked instead of going to school, and where a decent meal was a luxury. This is where Mary Ansell grew up. Mary was 22 years old in 1899. She worked as a live-in maid in Bloomsbury, a slightly better area of London. She slept in the kitchen of her employer's house. Her wages were so small that she'd had to postpone her own wedding because she couldn't afford the 7-shilling marriage license fee. That's less than £1. But Mary's struggles went deeper than just money. According to people who knew her growing up, Mary had always been different. Her teachers said she was slow. Her neighbours said she didn't mix well with other kids. Her mother later testified that Mary would sometimes talk to herself when she thought no one was listening. Today, we might recognise these as signs of a developmental disability or mental health condition, but in Victorian England, people just called you simple or weak-minded and left it at that. And there's one more crucial detail. Mental illness ran in Mary's family. One of those sisters was Caroline. Caroline Ansell was 19 years old, and she was locked away in Leavesden Asylum in Hertfordshire, just outside London. Leavesden housed over 1,500 patients, most of them were simply warehoused there. The official description said it was for people who were quiet and harmless. Caroline was described in records as having weak intellect. She couldn't take care of herself. She couldn't make her own decisions. She was essentially forgotten by society, locked away with hundreds of others in the same situation. So Caroline lived there, in a ward with other women labelled as epileptic patients, and occasionally she'd receive small gifts from the outside world, letters, small parcels, little reminders that someone remembered she existed. In early 1899, her sister Mary was still sending her things, but Mary was also doing something else. In early 1899, Mary took out a life insurance policy on Caroline's life. Mary's policy on Caroline was for £22.10, not a fortune. But remember, Mary couldn't even afford a £1 marriage licence. For her, £22 was about 6 months' wages. She paid 3p every week to keep the policy active. That 3p came out of her already tiny salary. When Caroline died, it would go to Mary, the person who held the policy. So now Mary had a financial reason for her sister to die. But on March 9th, 1899, Mary walked into a shop in Bloomsbury. "I need rat poison," Mary told the shop assistant. In Victorian England, you could buy deadly poison as easily as buying bread. Arsenic, phosphorus, strychnine, all available at your local chemist or general store. Just say you needed it for rats or mice, and they'd hand it over. The shop assistant wrapped it up. Mary paid. She walked out with enough poison to kill multiple people. That same night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Mary went into the kitchen, the same kitchen where she slept every night, and she baked a cake. She mixed in the phosphorus paste carefully. Then she wrapped the cake in brown paper, wrote her sister's name and address on it, and the next morning she took it to the post office. Just another package, just another gift, from a sister in London to a sister in an asylum. Nobody suspected anything. On March 10th, the package arrived at Leavesden Asylum. A staff member brought it to Caroline's ward. "Package for Caroline Ansell." Caroline was probably excited, mail didn't come often. And a homemade cake from her sister? That was special. Here's where the story gets even more tragic. Caroline didn't keep the cake for herself. She shared it with other women in her ward. In that grim asylum, a cake was a rare treat. Of course she shared it. Several women ate pieces of that cake. Within a few hours, they all started getting violently sick. The symptoms were horrific. Severe stomach pain, uncontrollable vomiting, convulsions, The asylum staff initially thought it might be food poisoning or another outbreak of the typhoid that was already spreading through the asylum. But something was different about this illness. It was too sudden, too severe, and it only affected the women who'd eaten the cake. Caroline had eaten the biggest piece. She got the sickest. For 5 days, she suffered. The pain was excruciating. She couldn't keep anything down. Her body was shutting down from phosphorus poisoning, though the doctors didn't know that yet. On March 14th, 1899, Caroline Ansell died. She was 19 years old. After Caroline died, the other women started to recover, and that's when the asylum doctors realized something very wrong had happened. Dr. Blair performed an autopsy on Caroline's body. He found traces of phosphorus in her organs. They tested the leftover cake. Someone had deliberately poisoned Caroline Ansell. The investigation moved quickly. They traced the package back through the postal system. The handwriting on the wrapper led them to Mary Ansell in Bloomsbury. But here's what made the case open and shut. Right after Caroline died, Mary tried to collect on that insurance policy. She walked into the insurance office and filed a claim for £22 and 10 shillings. She was trying to get paid for her sister's death. The insurance company refused to pay. They were already suspicious, and they contacted the police. Inspector Wood of the Hertfordshire Police went to London and arrested Mary at her employer's house in Bloomsbury. At first, Mary denied everything. But eventually, she admitted she'd sent the cake. And according to police records, she said something chilling. She thought that because Caroline died in an asylum, nobody would investigate too closely. She believed asylum patients' deaths didn't matter to anyone. She was almost right. In Victorian England, people in asylums were often treated as already dead to society. But this time, someone did investigate, and Mary Ansell was going to trial for murder. On June 30th, 1899, Mary Ansell stood trial at Hertford Assizes in Street Albans. The prosecution's case was simple and devastating. Mary bought phosphorus. Poison witnesses confirmed this. Her employer testified. There were no rats. Mary had lied. Mary baked the cake and sent it to Caroline. Mary admitted this. The cake contained phosphorus. Lab tests proved it. Caroline died from phosphorus poisoning. Autopsy confirmed it. Mary had a £22 insurance policy on Caroline's life. Documents proved it. Mary tried to collect the money right after Caroline died. Insurance company confirmed it. The evidence was overwhelming. This was premeditated murder for money. Mary's defense was basically non-existent. Her lawyer didn't argue that she was mentally incompetent. He didn't bring in doctors to testify about her intellectual disabilities or her family history of mental illness. The jury took 2 hours to reach their verdict. Guilty of murder. And they didn't recommend mercy. The judge, Mr. Justice Matthew, put on the traditional black cap and sentenced Mary Ansell to death by hanging. Mary was taken to Street Albans Prison to await execution. And that's when things got complicated. After Mary was sentenced to death, people started asking questions. Newspapers picked up the story. Not just the facts of the murder that was sensational enough, but questions about Mary herself. Was she really capable of understanding what she'd done? 2 government doctors examined Mary in prison. Dr. Nicholson and Dr. Brain both concluded she was legally responsible. Under something called the Manhattan Rules, you were only considered insane if you didn't understand that what you were doing was wrong. These doctors said Mary knew poisoning someone was wrong, therefore she should hang. But then another doctor got involved, Dr. Lionel Forbes Winslow, a specialist in mental disorders. Dr. Winslow said Mary had severe mental deficiencies. He described she had an intellectual disability and possibly inherited mental health conditions. He argued that while Mary might have known murder was wrong in an abstract sense, she didn't have the mental capacity to fully understand the consequences of her actions or to control her behavior. The public was divided. Some people thought Mary was a cold-blooded killer who deserved to hang. Others thought she was mentally disabled and shouldn't be held to the same standard of responsibility. The Daily Mail ran articles criticizing the medical examination as one-sided. Public meetings were held, petitions circulated, crowds gathered outside the prison praying for Mary's life. Even the Metropolitan Asylums Board, the organisation that ran Leavesden Asylum, passed a resolution asking for mercy. Parliament got involved. Members of the House of Commons asked questions 3 times in 1 week: July 13th, 17th, and 18th. The pressure was mounting, but ultimately, the decision rested with one man, the Home Secretary, Sir Matthew White Ridley. On July 15th, 1899, he refused to grant a reprieve. He said the murder was deliberate, the motive was clear, there were no grounds for mercy. The execution would proceed. The execution. July 19th, 1899, 8 a.m. Mary Ansell was led from her cell at Street Albans Prison to the execution chamber. The hangman was James Billington, one of the most experienced executioners in England. Mary was 22 years old. The execution was quick. The prison doctor certified her death. An inquest was held, as required by law. Everything was done according to procedure. Mary's body was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison yard. That's what they did with executed criminals. You weren't allowed a proper burial in a churchyard. You were buried in shame, without even a headstone. Years later, her body was moved to Hatfield Road Cemetery in Street Albans, where it remains today. Mary Ansell holds a unique place in history. She was the last woman executed in the 19th century in England. The 1800s ended just 18 months after her death. So what do we make of the Mary Ansell case? 2 sisters, both born into poverty, both affected by mental illness that ran in their family. One ended up locked in an asylum, forgotten by society until the day she ate a poisoned cake. The other ended up on the gallows, executed by that same society. The system failed them both. Was Mary Ansell a victim or a villain? Maybe she was both. Maybe that's what makes this case so haunting more than 125 years later. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Was justice served in this case? Or was Mary herself a victim of circumstances beyond her control? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.